When I found out that my wife was cheating on me, I was shattered. I couldn't believe that the woman I loved and trusted could cheat on me like that. But thanks to the advice of friends, I found a way to find out the whole truth and get back at her for what she had done. Get ready, I will tell you the story of cruel betrayal and revenge. Oleg married Tatyana at 23. Within a few years of marriage, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who by now were finishing 11th grade. From her grandmother, Tatyana inherited a small apartment in a bedroom community. She and her family had their own place, but she could not sell the old apartment in which Tatyana spent her childhood. Oleg offered to rent it, and though reluctantly, his wife agreed. She was so long and carefully chose a tenant for rent that Oleg became nervous every time his wife started talking about it. He understood that she wants to delay the moment, but everything was decided by chance. Tatyana's colleague's son was looking for a place to live just in that area, and the woman finally agreed to give her grandmother's apartment. When she arrived to meet her future tenant, she was pleasantly surprised by the appearance of the man, tall, thin, and blonde. He smiled at her so warmly that he unwittingly located Tanya. Dmitry told her that he had recently divorced and left his apartment to his wife and children. Tatyana did not ask about the reasons for separation with his wife, but willingly talked with him about many other things, and did not notice how the time flew by. A week later, she saw several missed calls on her phone from an unknown number. Calling back, she heard a vaguely familiar voice, in which she later recognized Dmitry's voice. "Did something happen to you?" Tanya asked worriedly, having already had time in her head to scroll through the possibilities of events. "Have you been flooded?" The interlocutor laughed. "No, it's all right. Would you like to have coffee with me?" The question sounded very sudden. The woman did not hesitate. All the while she unconsciously returned to the tenant in her thoughts, remembering the way he spoke, the sound of his laughter. For the first time in years, she stirred up some long-forgotten emotions. To the meeting, Tatyana, of course, agreed. Secretly from Oleg, she used to sneak out of work for lunch with Dmitry. He was the exact opposite of her husband, and thus beckoned to him. The hour they spent together seemed like a minute to the woman. "Maybe next time I'll come visit you. Will you show me how you're settling in?" she suggested once, when another meeting came to an end. Dema smiled slyly. It would be great. Unexpectedly for Oleg's wife, suddenly began to linger at work. At first, she referred to the fact that they had laid off several employees at once, and their workload was distributed to all the others. Later, it turned out that the firm difficult accounting period. At first, naive, good-natured Oleg believed in what Tanya said. His wife had never been caught in a lie before, and he could not even think that suddenly now, after many years of marriage, his beloved could choose another man. Cautiously, he began to ask his wife what was going on, but she did not give him the slightest reason to doubt her words. And the conversations came to naught. Once Oleg noticed on the screen of Tatyana's cell phone message from Dmitry, but he could not read them. "Your lodger writes to you. He has something wrong," asked the man, as if casually. Perhaps the payment dropped. "Perhaps," shrugged Tatyana. And the messages on the phone kept coming. Tanya could see that her relationship with her husband was deteriorating, but the euphoria of the state she was in intoxicated her brain and did not give adequate thinking. She tried to be the same loving wife and mother, but it was coming out badly. The focus of attention was directed at something else. One day, Oleg was in the company of friends and shared his hard thoughts and fears about his wife's infidelity. "And what exactly gave you these thoughts?" asked one of them. Oleg said everything that had been accumulating in him for so long. He was so tired of being mixed up in such a mess every day that he was glad to share it with someone. Listening, his friends supported his worst fears. One of the men advised him to install Machak on his wife's phone. Oleg liked the idea. Secretly from Tatyana, he connected a tracking app to her cell phone. He did not have to wait long. Just a few days later, his wife told him that she would be late again to run some errands in place of a sick colleague. After the couple finished talking, Oleg immediately opened the app. The dot that indicated Tanya's phone was moving on the map. At first the man could not understand anything, but later it came to him. His wife was on her way to her grandmother's apartment. The husband grabbed the spare keys from the nightstand and rushed to the same address. Already, standing at a traffic light, Oleg saw that the point had stopped. Tanya arrived at the spot. As soon as the light turned green, the man, ignoring the speed limit, hurried to his wife. The house where Tanya's grandmother used to live was old. There was no elevator in it. With a heavy heart, with effort, the man climbed the top 5th floor. Each step was difficult. He did not fully understand what he was going to see and what he was going to do. Oleg did not need the keys. The door was unlocked, and when he put down the handle, it opened noiselessly. The familiar scent of his wife's perfume hit his nose. At the entrance hung Tatyana's coat and exuded this fragrance. Oleg thought that in the apartment hung an ominous silence, which pressed on him from all sides. It was still throbbing in his head after traversing the distance of 5 floors. Intuitively, he walked toward the room. It felt like every one of his feet was tied to a weight that was slowing him down on the way to his goal. There were 2 people in the bed, his wife, Tatyana, and their lodger, Dmitry. Both were stunned by Oleg's appearance, and an awkward silence hung in the room. "What are you doing here?" asked Tanya finally. "I've come to fetch you." Her husband answered her briefly. "Get ready." It was the first time in many years of marriage that the woman had seen her spouse so angry, disappointed, and sad at the same time. Tatyana was a little afraid to get out from under the covers. She didn't know what to expect from Oleg in this state, but she had no choice. "Get ready," her husband repeated firmly. Oleg held himself together with the last of his strength. Everything inside him was bubbling with anger. It seemed to him that he was so tense that the slightest flick of a match will explode. When his wife finally got dressed, he dragged her out of the apartment by the scruff of her neck, telling her they would talk to her downstairs. In the car, Tanya made no excuses, no pleas for conversion. She told it like it was, and added that she didn't regret what had happened one bit, because the situation had helped her feel alive again. Oleg snorted loudly when he heard this. He respected her for not humiliating herself in front of him by fake crying and begging for forgiveness. But in everything else, she became disgusting to him. Even looking at her was unbearable to him. The couple did not speak for months. Tatyana made timid attempts to start a conversation with Oleg, but he silently turned away and went away. All this time, he sincerely believed that he could forgive his wife, and for the sake of children to continue to live as a normal family. But now there was only one feeling of disgust towards the once beloved woman. He made the decision to divorce 3 months after what had happened. Tanya did not argue. The children told their father about how their mother's life had turned out after their divorce. Oleg found out that Tanya moved in with Dmitry, but at one point the new man went on a binge. So the real reason why Dmitry did not work out with his first wife was revealed. The woman just simply would not tolerate a house-drunken husband who could not dry off for months. A couple of years later, Tanya gave up and separated from him, leaving him to live in his grandmother's apartment. The children grew up and went to university. The woman was left alone, and sometimes she was ready to be a wolf from her loneliness. Next story. I suspected my wife was cheating on me, but I didn't know how to check, until I found a way that changed everything. When my wife started acting weird and not returning my calls, I decided to figure out what was going on, and what I found out amazed me. Konstantin and Victoria had been married for 7 years. This marriage was not Victoria's first. Before the bone, she had a man with whom they had had a son, and somehow made it through 3 years of married life. They were both young, and neither wanted to make concessions. They divorced quickly and by mutual consent. Victoria's mother sighed that her daughter literally, with her own hands, ruined her life, leaving herself without a reliable shoulder by her side and her son without a father. But the young woman was not worried. She was sure of herself and that her ex-husband was not her last carriage. And so it turned out. At work she met Kostya. He was an incoming programmer at their firm. The women of Victoria's colleagues swooned over Konstantin. He reeked of calmness and reliability. To get such a husband is anyone's dream. But Vicky was lucky and Kostya did not need anyone. He fell in love with her at first sight. At first, she absent-mindedly did not notice his modest signs of attention, but as when the female employees began to sigh enviously, looking at her and throwing pokes and comments, Victoria all realized. Their first date was awkward. They had both been without a relationship for a long time and had lost their flirtation skills. Konstantin accepted his beloved's son immediately. It was out of the question for him, and soon he began to feel that Maxim was his own child. Victoria's mother couldn't get excited about her future son-in-law. "What a man you are!" Smiling, she said to Kostya, and then continued in a whisper. "Not like that, Daddy Max." The man did not like hearing such things, but he understood that his mother-in-law was trying to please him in such a way and just smiled in response. Vika was happy that her mother was no longer nagging her about her lonely life and the absence of a father for her child. When Konstantin came into her life, a lot has changed, but the most important thing was that Vika persuaded him to reconcile with his brother, with whom Kostya at that time did not talk for 10 years. The reason was trivial. Igor, who was 2 years older, had stolen his brother's first love. Victoria, it turned out to be a silly and long overdue stage, so she gradually led her husband to the fact that with Igor to make up. When Victoria got tired of working in an office, she decided to go back to her first hotly beloved job, which she once had to quit because of low pay. Now there was enough money, and she could go back to her job as a coach in a children's dance group without thinking about the benefits. Konstantin supported her, but almost immediately after the change in activities, he noticed that the spouse became more aloof. Of course, the man wrote off everything to the fact that his beloved stressed, and everything will soon be fine. He was so in love with her and so trusted that he did not even think about cheating. Konstantin himself worked a lot. Together with a friend, he opened a small firm, and now he was not only a programmer, but also the boss. This required a lot of effort, both moral and physical. He was well aware that in the last year of their family life, they had lost some of their togetherness, but he hoped that all the difficulties were temporary. The man tried to show his love for his wife, brought flowers if he stayed too long at work, invited Victoria to a restaurant to spend time just the two of them, but increasingly felt a sense of loneliness, even when they were closest in physical terms. It frightened and saddened him at the same time. Konstantin's favorite time for him was the time they spent together with Maxim. They played console games, assembled a constructor, went to museums. It was as if the man was back in his childhood, when he and his son were doing something similar. Victoria left with her charges for a competition in the neighboring city, and for the next 3 days, Kostya and Max were on their own. "Let's go to the movies with Uncle Igor. There's a new superhero movie out," the father suggested to his son. "No, I'm not going." Negative shook his head boy. "Why not?" The man was surprised because his son loved everything to do with comic books and heroes from them. The boy hesitated, picking at the plate of pasta his father had made for dinner. It was obvious that he did not really want to talk about the subject, but Kostya decided to push the child. "Why?" He repeated his question. Maxim reluctantly replied that he did not like Uncle Igor, and he did not want to go anywhere with him. Konstantin was taken aback, and the logical question of why Maxim did not like his uncle so much, he got quite a different answer from what he would have expected. The boy said that Igor comes to mom when his dad is not there. They lock themselves in a room and talk there for a long time. The man felt as if the ground was slipping from under his feet. The story that had happened to him at 16 was repeating itself now. He understood, of course, what his brother and Victoria were talking about, and the format of those conversations. Anger darkened his eyes and he clenched his fists. "Dad," Max said cautiously. "It's all right. Thanks for sharing this with me." Pulling himself together, his father answered him. The boy smiled at him and asked to go to the movies, just the two of them. Konstantin spent all 3 days in deep thought. He rushed from the thought of forgetting everything and moving on with his life to the frantic desire to do something with his brother. It hurt him to think that when Victoria left, she would take Maxim with her and prevent them from interacting in any way. After all, that was exactly what she was doing to her son's own father right now. It was not in his plans to be separated from Max, so the man frantically considered what to do next. For several weeks now, Konstantin had been walking around black as a cloud. Wife, returned to the competition, immediately noted this mood, but to get an answer from her husband could not. He waved her off as an annoying fly and mumbled something, called out at work. All the while he was trying to get enough of communicating with his son, assuming an imminent separation. One day he returned home and found Igor and Vika in the kitchen. They were drinking tea and talking about something. Maxim was not at home, and Kostya became tense beforehand. "Oh, hello." He tried to speak as casually as possible. He did not manage to do it very well. Kostya shook hands with his brother and kissed his wife lightly on the cheek. "What are you whispering about?" The man's smile was strained, as if someone was pulling at his strings from behind. That's why it came out crooked and not sincere. Victoria and Igor looked at each other silently, and her brother answered that they had a serious conversation. Tension was building. It hung in the air like a thundercloud. "Kostya, here's the thing," my brother began. "Vika and I, well, we were in love." Kostya hated it when his interlocutor mumbled. He could hardly listen to his brother, trying to control himself. Igor continued to babble on about how he and Victoria had long been in love with each other and wanted to solve everything peacefully. When the man finished his story, the lovers simultaneously looked at Konstantin, waiting for his reaction. And he purposely hesitated to respond, knowing that his wife was about to explode with impatience. "Okay, finally," he answered, "but you will not prevent me from communicating with my son." Vika was willing to agree to these terms. All she wanted now was to finally get rid of this burdensome feeling of betrayal and constant lying. They both explained the situation to Maxim. When her son burst into tears and clung to his bone with a dead grip, screaming that he wouldn't let go, Vicky's heart clenched. Her second husband had become a truly wonderful father to her child, and it hurt her to even physically separate them. With a heavy heart, she allowed Max to come visit Konstantin on the weekends. Igor and Vika began to live together, and soon the woman became pregnant. They did not get married, but the man did not refuse the child. Everything was going quite well, but after a few years, Igor began to lose interest in Victoria. He was repeating his old script: take the woman he loved from his brother, play with her, and leave her. Apparently, this was the kind of love he had in mind when he told his brother about her. Vika was depressed, and although Igor did not refuse to help the child financially, now the woman had two of them. It was much harder to recover. She had to go back to her mother for a while. Her mother started nagging her again, because now she was once again destroying her life with her own hands. The woman was sure that now, with two children in her arms, her daughter would never find another husband who would agree to this. And Vicky's own self-confidence noticeably dimmed after this breakup. So that's the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters.